The greatest joke in Silicon Valley? Men in tailored suits, preaching innovation on stage, while the algorithm powering their billion-dollar empires was written by a silent woman in the back row holding zero equity. They assumed their exploitative contracts owned me. They had no idea that long before I ever walked through their doors, I planted a legal time bomb deep inside the very code they bleed dry every single day. Today, I push the button. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to be completely sincere with you all today. YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to continue operating, which means we are forced to stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and shift our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and feature highly detailed situations that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube, complete with multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the comments section of this video. Let us begin today's journey and meet our architect of vengeance, a brilliant woman named Madison Allen. The sunlight, piercing through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 40th floor of the Nebula Corps headquarters in Austin, Texas, was blinding, but it did nothing to warm the freezing temperature of the glass boardroom. I sat perfectly still. At 28 years of age, I was the algorithm systems architect, though that title barely scratched the surface of my actual role. Resting on the polished mahogany table directly in front of me was a pristine copy of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a high-definition, professionally retouched photograph of our Chief Executive Officer, Julian Croft. He was flashing a perfectly white smile, wearing a bespoke suit, positioned right above a bold, arrogant headline that read, "The Genius Behind the Artificial Intelligence Logistics Revolution." I stared at the glossy paper, feeling a hollow, rhythmic pounding in my chest. The genius. Julian could barely write a basic script in Python without crashing his own browser. Yet there he was, crowned as the visionary savior of modern supply chain technology. The heavy glass door swung open, shattering the quiet. Julian strolled in, radiating the obnoxious, overconfident energy of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire life. He did not bother with pleasantries, with the fake, practiced smile that did not reach his cold eyes. He tossed a thick, legally bound document onto the table. It slid across the smooth wood and stopped right on top of his Forbes cover. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, and delivered the executioner's blow with the casual tone of someone ordering a morning coffee. He informed me that the 5% equity stake we had agreed upon with a firm handshake 5 long years ago was no longer viable. According to him, the board of directors needed to clean up the capitalization table. The company was gearing up to raise a massive Series C funding round from top-tier venture capitalists, and giving a massive chunk of equity to an employee who was not technically a co-founder was just too messy. Instead, that life-changing 5% was being generously converted into a flat, insulting end-of-the-year cash bonus, a bonus that would barely cover a few months of rent in this city. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and suffocating. A lesser person might have screamed, flipped the heavy table, or burst into tears of pure, unadulterated frustration. I did none of those things. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. I locked eyes with him and calmly reminded him of the absolute truth. I reminded him that the entire supply chain optimization artificial intelligence core was written entirely by my 2 hands. I reminded him of the cramped, unheated garage where we started, the countless sleepless nights I spent debugging the very system that was now making him a billionaire, while he was out networking at luxury golf courses. Julian let out a loud, patronizing laugh. It was the kind of dismissive chuckle reserved for a naive child. He stood up, walked around the large table, and placed a heavy, uninvited hand on my shoulder. He patted it twice, a gesture dripping with condescension, and delivered the ultimate tech bro cliché. "Do not take things so personally, Madison," he said, his voice smooth and dripping with false sympathy. We are a family here. You know that. But business is business. You have to understand your role. You are the builder. Madison, not the landlord. The builder, not the landlord. The words hung in the air, revealing the rotten, exploitative core hidden beneath the shiny veneer of Silicon Valley innovation. They loved to preach about changing the world, but behind the glass walls, it was just a modern sweatshop dressed up with free snacks and ping pong tables. I looked down at the table. Sitting right next to the insulting contract was his pen, a $2,000 Mont Blanc fountain pen, a flashy toy he bought to celebrate our last successful deployment. I did not cry. I did not yell. I reached out and picked up the heavy, expensive pen. I pulled the contract toward me, flipped to the signature page, and scrawled a completely illegible, legally worthless scribble on the dotted line. I capped the pen, set it down softly, and looked up at Julian with a gentle, terrifyingly calm smile. "You are right," I said softly. "Business is business." Julian beamed, clearly relieved that the difficult conversation was over and that his little worker bee had fallen back into line. He turned his back to me to admire the skyline. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and walked out of the glass boardroom. I did not turn left down the corridor to return to my desk. I did not pack up my favorite coffee mug or say goodbye to my engineering team. I walked straight ahead, turning right toward the main elevators. I pressed the button for the ground floor and stepped inside the steel box. As the doors began to slide shut, blocking out the gleaming logo of Nebula Corps forever, I calmly pulled my phone from my pocket. In 3 swift motions, I deleted my entire corporate calendar, wiped my remote access keys, and permanently blocked Julian's personal and work numbers. The purge had officially begun. The heavy wooden door of my apartment clicked shut behind me, the deadbolt sliding into place with a satisfying, final thud. Outside, the city of Austin continued its relentless, noisy pace, completely ignorant of the corporate execution I had just walked away from. Inside my quiet living room, the real work was about to begin. I did not waste time changing out of my professional attire. I walked straight into my bedroom, knelt on the hardwood floor, and reached deep into the dusty shadows beneath my bed. I dragged out a battered, scuffed vintage suitcase. Most people keeping a hidden stash in their apartment have it filled with stacks of emergency cash, fake passports, or sentimental junk. Mine held something infinitely more valuable and far more dangerous. I snapped the rusty metal latches open. Resting on the faded fabric lining was a heavy, metallic cold storage hard drive from my senior year of college. It was a bulky, outdated piece of hardware, but it was the most important physical object in my possession. I carried the drive to my workstation in the corner of the room, a multi-monitor setup that hummed with quiet, contained power. As I plugged the device into the interface and watched the complex decryption sequence initiate across my screens, I allowed myself a rare, genuine smile. The monitors bathed the dark room in a sharp blue light, illuminating the absolute truth that Julian Croft and his entire board of directors were blissfully unaware of. The revolutionary core architecture of the logistics artificial intelligence system, the exact same system they were currently parading in front of high-profile venture capitalists, was not born in Julian's cramped, unheated startup garage. It was my university graduation thesis. More importantly, I had the incredible foresight to meticulously register the copyright and file for a comprehensive individual patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, a full 12 months before I ever signed an employment contract with Nebula Corps. When I finally agreed to join Julian's little venture, I embedded a magnificent, highly sophisticated legal landmine right into my initial onboarding documentation. I did not give them outright ownership of the foundational code. Instead, I granted Nebula Corps the right to use the open-source repository under a highly restrictive, limited personal license. Buried deep within the terms and conditions, attached as an obscure text file in the primary GitHub repository, was a tiny but lethal poison pill clause. It stated in plain, undeniable legal English that the usage license would be automatically and immediately revoked the exact second I was no longer officially employed in the position of project manager. Julian's high-priced corporate lawyers were entirely too arrogant and far too lazy to thoroughly read the attached documentation of what they assumed was a low-level engineering repository. They assumed standard intellectual property assignment applied to every single line of code. They assumed terribly wrong. By forcing me out of my role and changing my compensation structure this morning, Julian had just unknowingly detonated the bomb. But before the impending explosion, I needed to secure the perimeter and clear the blast radius. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with rapid, practiced precision. I established a secure virtual private network, carefully routing my encrypted connection through a series of protected servers located in Switzerland. I deployed an automated batch of scripts I had written months ago in preparation for this exact scenario. Like a digital ghost, I methodically scrubbed my personal footprints from Nebula Core's internal network. I purged my secure shell keys, shredded the access logs, and wiped my personal development configurations. Every trace of my existence vanished into the ether. I left the core algorithms perfectly intact and running smoothly. They needed to keep operating, completely unaware that their entire foundation was now built on legally pirated, stolen property. With my tracks successfully covered, I shifted my focus from defense to a highly aggressive offense. I opened a securely encrypted browser tab and pulled up a comprehensive market analysis of the global logistics industry. I scrolled past the irrelevant startups and the struggling legacy firms. My eyes locked onto the absolute perfect weapon, Vanguard Dynamics, headquartered in Chicago. Vanguard was a towering titan of the industry, a massive, established conglomerate that had been steadily bleeding market share and hemorrhaging millions of dollars in profits over the past 2 years. Their massive losses were entirely because they were being ruthlessly undercut by Nebula Core's superior routing artificial intelligence. They were a wounded giant, and they were desperate. More importantly, Vanguard Dynamics was commanded by Victoria Sterling. She was a woman notoriously known across the global business world as the Iron Queen of corporate warfare. She was ruthless, highly efficient, and harbored a very public, burning hatred for Julian Croft's arrogant media presence. I opened a heavily encrypted, untraceable email client. I bypassed the standard corporate contact forms and targeted Victoria Sterling's direct personal executive inbox, a hidden routing address I had acquired through some highly creative digital reconnaissance. I did not bother with a polite introduction or standard corporate pleasantries. Time was of the essence. I attached exactly 3 lines of original, uncompiled source code to the message. Those 3 lines were the unmistakable digital DNA of the algorithm currently powering her biggest rival. Below the raw code, I typed a single, decisive message. I am holding the keys to bring down Julian Croft's entire empire. Do you want to buy them? I hovered my mouse over the send button for merely a fraction of a second. I pressed it down, watching the encryption protocol scramble the data and send it out into the digital void. The heist was no longer in the planning phase. The monster was awake, and we were officially in motion. 72 hours later, I was touching down in a frozen, unforgiving Chicago. A brutal Midwestern blizzard was tearing through the city, grounding commercial flights and turning the streets into a chaotic maze of whiteout conditions and wailing sirens. I did not care. I had chartered a private jet using the last of my personal savings, because vengeance operates on a strict timetable. The towering glass and steel monolith of the Vanguard Dynamics headquarters pierced the storm like a dark, unyielding fortress. Walking into that silent, heavily guarded lobby felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I bypassed the standard reception protocols. My heavily encrypted email had done its job perfectly. A grim-faced head of corporate security was waiting for me. He did not say a single word, merely nodded and escorted me into an express elevator that shot us up to the executive penthouse level. Vanguard's main conference room stood in stark contrast to Julian's ostentatious, intensely lit glass office in Austin. This space was a lesson in commanding respect, clad in dark walnut and carrying the scent of generational wealth, rich leather, and silent, formidable influence. Positioned at the distant head of an exceptionally lengthy mahogany table sat Victoria Sterling, Vanguard Dynamics' chief executive officer wore a flawlessly tailored dark gray suit, her silver hair gathered into a strict, immaculate bun. She was an executive who had successfully navigated and mastered a sector established by intensely competitive peers, and she possessed a stare that felt like a tangible pressure bearing down on your chest. She extended no offer of a hot beverage to ward off the chill. She remained seated rather than rising to greet me. She merely watched me with complete, unwavering composure. Julian Croft is a narcissistic, predictable amateur, Victoria finally spoke, her voice a low, commanding alto that demanded total attention. But he is not entirely stupid. If this is his desperate, pathetic attempt at corporate espionage, if he sent his little prodigy here to feed us poisoned data and trigger a massive intellectual property lawsuit to bankrupt my firm, you can turn around right now. I will have my security team escort you out into the snow, and by tomorrow morning, my legal department will ensure you never work in the technology sector again. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact, and I certainly did not offer a defensive, trembling explanation. Weakness is blood in the water for a woman like Victoria Sterling. Instead, I unclasped my leather briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out a sleek, encrypted flash drive. I walked slowly down the length of the massive table, keeping my posture rigid and confident. I plugged the drive directly into the primary presentation terminal at the head of the table. I tapped the display panel, and the massive 80-inch screen dominating the far wall flared to life. "I am not here to play games, Miss Sterling," I said, my voice steady and echoing against the wood paneling. "I am here to sell you the very weapon that is currently slaughtering your market share." I opened the first file. The screen displayed a highly detailed, legally binding document stamped with the official seal of the government. This is United States Patent Number 88429. It is the comprehensive, foundational patent for the core predictive routing architecture that Nebula Core utilizes to optimize global logistics. Notice the filing date. It was approved a full 12 months before I ever set foot in Julian's company. More importantly, notice the name of the sole proprietor. Victoria leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the complex legal jargon with the speed of a seasoned prosecutor. I did not stop there. I opened the next window, displaying years of meticulously logged source code commit histories and cryptographic signatures. Julian Croft has never understood the engine of his own machine. Look at the access logs. He has not committed a single line of foundational code in 5 years. He cannot decrypt the master branches. He does not even possess the administrative privileges to alter the neural network weights. He is merely a salesman wearing a headset, selling my intellect to the highest bidder. My code made him a billionaire, and yesterday, he tried to toss me aside. I paused, letting the raw, undeniable truth of the situation settle into the quiet room. I could see the gears turning behind Victoria's icy exterior. She was beginning to understand the monumental scale of what I was offering, but she still needed the absolute kill shot. I delivered it without a second of hesitation. But here is the truly beautiful part. Victoria, Nebula Core is scheduled to finalize a massive, highly classified demonstration next week. On Friday afternoon, Julian is standing in front of the top brass of the United States Department of Defense. He is trying to close an exclusive military logistics contract worth $500 million. They are going to use my exact algorithmic architecture to run a real-time global military supply chain simulation. I leaned over the table, bracing my hands on the polished wood, bringing my face closer to hers to ensure every single word landed with devastating impact. Due to a very specific, carefully buried licensing clause, the exact second they forced me out of my project management role yesterday, their right to use my software was legally and irrevocably terminated. The massive system they are running right now is stolen property. If that system suddenly crashes and locks them out right in the middle of a live demonstration for the Pentagon, Julian Croft will not just lose a $500 million contract, he will be federally indicted for attempting to defraud the United States government. For the first time since I walked into the room, Victoria Sterling's expression changed. A slow, chilling, and utterly dangerous smirk spread across her face. It was the look of a seasoned apex predator realizing that its biggest rival had just willingly stepped into an inescapable snare. She did not ask another technical question. She did not demand further proof. She reached for the heavy, secure landline sitting on her desk, punched in a quick 3-digit extension, and spoke a single, sharp sentence into the receiver. "Wake up the senior partners and get the entire intellectual property litigation team into my boardroom right now." She hung up the phone, folded her hands, and looked at me not as a rogue employee, but as a genuine equal. The midnight silence of the corporate fortress was violently broken as Vanguard's most ruthless legal minds descended upon the penthouse. Men and women in tailored suits rushed in, carrying thick binders and secure laptops. For the next several hours, the room became a hurricane of complex legal maneuvering, aggressive risk assessments, and rapid contract drafting. They brought in external technical auditors to verify the patent claims. The auditors pored over the hash keys and confirmed to Victoria in hushed, urgent tones that my claims were absolutely impenetrable. The code was legally mine. The trap was perfectly set. We argued over liability clauses, operational control, and corporate structure with brutal, exhausting efficiency. I demanded absolute authority over the engineering teams, and Victoria demanded absolute assurance that the kill switch would function exactly as promised. There was no room for sentimentality, only a mutual respect forged in the fires of ruthless ambition. By the time the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room chimed 3 o'clock in the morning, the War Council was finally complete. The freshly printed, ironclad documents were placed right between us. The terms were exactly what I had designed them to be. I was officially named the new Chief Technology Officer of Vanguard Dynamics. Furthermore, Vanguard would immediately spin off a brand new subsidiary company dedicated solely to advanced artificial intelligence integration, and I would personally hold a non-dilutable 15% equity stake in that new entity. In exchange, Vanguard Dynamics received the exclusive, irrevocable rights to exploit and weaponize my patented algorithm. Victoria signed her name with a sharp, decisive stroke of black ink. I took the pen from the table and mirrored her action, permanently locking our destinies together in legal binding. We did not shake hands. We did not offer weak, congratulatory smiles. We simply stared at the final signatures, fully aware that we had just loaded a devastating silver bullet into the chamber. All that was left to do was pull the trigger on Friday. Friday morning arrived with the heavy, electric tension of an execution day, over 1,000 miles away from my current location. The grand ballroom of the Walter E. Washington Convention Center in Washington District of Columbia was packed to absolute capacity. I sat perfectly still in the subterranean security bunker beneath the Vanguard Dynamics Tower in Chicago. My eyes locked on the massive array of high-definition monitors dominating the front wall. The primary screen displayed the live encrypted feed of the Department of Defense Summit. Julian Croft was entirely in his element. He strutted across the brightly lit stage, dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit, looking every inch the visionary tech savior he pretended to be. Seated in the front rows were hundreds of highly decorated military generals, top-tier Pentagon officials, and influential government contractors. The stakes were astronomical. Julian was not just pitching a minor software update. He was actively attempting to close an exclusive, classified military logistics contract worth $500 million. The television cameras rolled steadily, broadcasting his charismatic, blindingly white smile to secure defense network terminals all across the nation. The atmosphere inside the Vanguard control room was the exact opposite of the chaotic, flashy circus happening on that stage. It was a tomb of focused, deadly silence, bathed in the cool, clinical glow of server diagnostic displays. Victoria Sterling sat in a plush leather chair beside me, her posture immaculate, her legs elegantly crossed. A porcelain cup of dark black coffee rested perfectly steady in her hand. We were not frantically typing on keyboards. We were not sweating with anxiety. We were merely spectators, watching the final act of a tragic play I had carefully written years ago. Directly above the live stream of Julian's smug face was a digital clock, its red numbers silently counting down the seconds to his absolute destruction. 3 minutes, 2 minutes. The legal and technical assault was perfectly synchronized, a dual-pronged strike waiting for my exact command. On the massive screen, Julian raised a hand, dramatically asking for the massive room to quiet down. His voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art surround sound system, echoed with a nauseating level of confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the armed forces," Julian declared smoothly, gesturing toward a towering digital globe rendered in soothing blue tones behind him. "Modern warfare is no longer decided strictly on the battlefield. It is decided entirely within the supply chain. Today, Nebula Corps is proud to present an artificial intelligence system that operates with zero latency, zero blind spots, and absolutely zero margin for error." I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter, scalding liquid burning pleasantly down my throat. I glanced over at Victoria. She did not say a single word, but the slight, predatory curve of her lips spoke volumes. We watched closely as Julian dramatically pulled a sleek wireless detonator-style remote from his breast pocket, raising it high into the air for the press cameras to capture. "I will now initiate the live, real-time simulation of our global military transport optimization protocol," Julian announced to the breathless crowd. "Send it," I whispered into the secure communications line, linking us directly to Vanguard's legal department on the executive floor above. The exact second, Julian Croft's thumb pressed down firmly on the remote. Vanguard's lead litigant hit the enter key on a highly prioritized, federally tracked digital transmission. An airtight, legally devastating cease and desist order slammed into the primary corporate firewalls of Nebula Corps. It was the formal legal trigger, but the actual technical execution was entirely in my hands. I did not need to launch a complex cyber attack. I did not need to hack through sophisticated security protocols or deploy malicious ransomware. I simply reached over to the mechanical keyboard resting gently on my lap, typed a single, basic command line, and pressed the enter key. I remotely revoked the digital copyright authentication token. It was a completely legal, standard administrative action, pulling the invisible pin out of the grenade. The exact moment the key was withdrawn, the massive artificial intelligence core sitting in the cloud suddenly realized it no longer had the legal permission to exist on their hardware. Instantly, 100% of Nebula Corps' distributed cloud server clusters recognized the foundation they were running on as illegally pirated, unauthorized software. The system's automated internal security protocols, which I had personally designed from scratch to protect against data theft, violently turned inward. The servers began a catastrophic, unyielding cascade failure, aggressively locking down every single gigabyte of operational memory to prevent the unauthorized execution of stolen intellectual property. Back on the live feed. In Washington, the soothing blue globe on the 80-inch screen behind Julian froze entirely. A horrifying, mechanical grinding sound echoed through the auditorium speakers as the back-end servers violently rejected the incoming data requests. Julian turned around, his confident smile faltering slightly as the blue light sputtered and died. Then, the massive screen violently flashed to a blinding, aggressive crimson red, giant, bold. White letters appeared across the entire display, completely dwarfing Julian's silhouette. The text was merciless, blazing like a neon sign of doom. "Error. Core copyright violation. System access denied." A collective gasp rippled through the massive audience of generals and defense contractors. The quiet murmurs of confusion instantly erupted into a chaotic, angry roar. Julian froze, staring up at the massive red warning label like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of a speeding freight train. He tapped the wireless remote frantically, his thumb smashing the button over and over again in a desperate, futile rhythm. Nothing happened. The bright red screen glared down at him, broadcasting his fraudulent failure to the entire world. The heavy stage makeup could no longer hide the sudden, sheer panic rapidly draining the color from his face. Heavy beads of sweat instantly broke out across his forehead. ruining his perfectly styled hair. "Technical team," Julian barked into his microphone, his voice cracking violently, completely losing its smooth, practiced charm. "Get the engineering bay on the line right now. We have a minor graphical glitch. Someone reset the display server immediately." I was shouting into a black void. I knew exactly what was happening in his engineering bay back in Austin. His elite technicians were currently staring at completely locked terminal screens, entirely incapable of bypassing the hard-coded intellectual property failsafes. They were utterly, hopelessly paralyzed. Julian paced back and forth on the stage, visibly shaking, desperately waving his arms at the audiovisual crew standing off-camera. He looked utterly pathetic, a frantic, terrified clown performing a tragic comedy on a national broadcast. The highly decorated generals in the front row were already standing up. Their faces were hardened with disgust and completely vanished patience. Without a word, they turned their backs on the stage and actively began walking out of the presentation, their heavy boots echoing loudly over the chaos. In the quiet Chicago bunker, Victoria Sterling finally broke her long silence. She calmly picked up a digital tablet displaying the real-time financial markets. "Look at the NASDAQ composite," she murmured, a dark, heavy satisfaction lacing her tone. I leaned over to look at the glowing screen. The live broadcast of the catastrophic failure had instantly hit the major financial news networks. Wall Street algorithms are entirely devoid of human mercy. The exact moment the words "copyright violation" and "system access denied" were broadcast at a Department of Defense summit, the automated trading bots initiated a massive, relentless sell-off. Nebula Corps' stock price, which had been artificially inflated for years by Julian's empty promises and charismatic lies, immediately nosedived. We watched the red line on the graph plummet straight down in real time. The violent crash triggered automatic volatility halts, but it was useless. The sell orders piled up, violently wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization long before the closing bell even had a chance to ring. The fraudulent empire was officially burning to the ground, and Julian Croft was trapped on a brightly lit stage, desperately trying to put out the raging inferno with his bare, trembling hands. The Austin headquarters of Nebula Corps had devolved into a scene of absolute, unmitigated chaos. Julian Croft was a man drowning in a storm of his own making. In the span of a single afternoon, he went from a celebrated tech visionary to a frantic, cornered animal. He called my phone over 50 times, desperate to scream at me, to demand that I fix the catastrophic mess on the stage in Washington, but the number he dialed was completely dead. I had permanently deactivated that line the exact minute I walked out of his glass boardroom. Denied the satisfaction of a verbal assault, he resorted to sending a barrage of unhinged, deeply unprofessional emails to my old personal address. His messages were frantic blocks of text, littered with aggressive capital letters, threatening to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He explicitly accused me of cyber terrorism and malicious destruction of company property. He genuinely believed that throwing big, scary legal words around would intimidate me into submission. When the aggressive emails yielded absolute silence, Julian resorted to the only playbook he actually understood. He tried to control the public narrative. By Friday evening, he had his highly paid public relations team planting desperate, fabricated rumors across major technology publications like TechCrunch and Wired. The articles quoted anonymous sources inside Nebula Corps, painting a tragic picture of Julian as the victim of a deeply unstable, disgruntled former employee. They spun a ridiculous fantasy, claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown and planted a malicious ransomware virus deep inside their systems to extort the company for millions of dollars. It was a pathetic, cowardly attempt to deflect blame, leaning heavily on the tired stereotype of the hysterical female engineer. I did not waste a single breath trying to defend myself on social media. I did not need to. When you hold all the cards, you do not bicker with a cheat. You simply flip the table. On Monday morning, Victoria Sterling delivered the fatal, crushing blow on my behalf. Vanguard Dynamics did not just issue a simple press release. They executed a coordinated, overwhelming public relations strike. Victoria authorized the public release of my official United States patent filings, alongside the original, unredacted limited personal license agreement that Julian had so arrogantly ignored. In one brilliant, aggressive maneuver, Vanguard turned Julian's desperate public threats into the exact evidence needed to destroy him. The narrative shifted instantly. The media tore into the new documents, realizing that Julian Croft was not the victim of a cyber attack. I was a corporate fraud who had knowingly colluded to deceive venture capitalists and the United States government by attempting to sell them stolen technology. Panicking as the walls closed in, Julian commanded his legal team to aggressively file an injunction and a massive countersuit against both me and Vanguard Dynamics. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Vanguard's heavyweight legal department did not even flinch. Instead of playing defense, they immediately initiated an aggressive legal discovery process. They legally demanded a full, unfettered audit of Nebula Corps' entire historical code repository, along with every single internal corporate chat log and executive email from the past 5 years. The moment the discovery demands landed on their desks, Julian's lawyers panicked. They knew exactly how much toxic, illegal behavior was hidden in those internal communications. Terrified that a forensic audit would unearth a mountain of secondary corporate crimes, they instantly and completely withdrew their lawsuit. They tucked their tails between their legs and fled the battlefield. But the most devastating blow, the absolute death knell for Nebula Corps, did not come from lawyers or journalists. It came from within. Julian had built his entire empire on the backs of brilliant, severely underpaid, and deeply exhausted engineers, the very same people he called builders while he played the landlord. Over the weekend, while Julian was busy planting fake stories in the press, I was busy sending out a series of highly targeted, encrypted recruitment emails. I reached out to the top 50% of Nebula Corps' most talented senior developers. My offer was incredibly simple and utterly irresistible. I offered them positions at the newly formed Vanguard Artificial Intelligence Division, complete with double their current salaries, a completely transparent work environment, and actual, tangible equity in the products they created. By Tuesday morning, an unprecedented mass exodus occurred. Half of the engineering department walked into the Austin office, placed their security badges on the receptionist's desk, and resigned on the spot. In the span of exactly 48 hours, Julian's billion-dollar empire was completely hollowed out, leaving him standing alone in an empty, silent glass tower. 3 months passed, and the slow, grinding wheels of federal justice finally caught up to the illusion Julian Croft had built. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission formally launched a massive investigation into Nebula Corps for systemic investor fraud. Facing impending federal indictments and hemorrhaging cash, the board of directors did exactly what cowards always do. They turned on their golden boy. They unceremoniously stripped Julian of his chief executive officer title, locked him out of his own building, and left the company teetering on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. It was late on a freezing Tuesday evening when he made his final, pathetic move. I was walking across the private, underground parking garage beneath the Vanguard Tower, the sharp clack of my heels echoing in the vast concrete space. A shadowy figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was Julian. He looked completely unrecognizable. The bespoke, perfectly tailored suits and arrogant posture were gone. He was wearing a wrinkled, dirty overcoat, his face pale, unshaven, and deeply hollowed out by stress and impending ruin. He had somehow bypassed security to ambush me in a desperate, final attempt at salvation. He practically fell to his knees on the freezing concrete right in front of me. His voice trembled as he begged me to call off the legal dogs, to withdraw the intellectual property claims, and to publicly state it was all a massive misunderstanding. He swore up and down that he would pay me back every single penny I was owed, that he would issue a formal public apology on every major news network, and that he would give me whatever I wanted if I just let him keep his freedom. I stopped and looked down at him. I felt no burning anger. I felt no need to mock his pathetic state. I only felt a cold, absolute detachment. You still do not understand, Julian, Do you? I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, echoing softly in the empty garage. I did not do this to demand money or an apology. I did this to prove that you simply do not exist without me. I did not wait for his response. I turned on my heel, unlocked the door to my midnight black Porsche, and drove away, leaving him kneeling alone in the dim, freezing shadows of the concrete floor. 2 weeks later, the United States Department of Defense officially released their public statement. They had signed an exclusive, ironclad contract worth exactly $500 million. However, the recipient was not Nebula Corps. The massive government contract was awarded to the newly formed Advanced Artificial Intelligence Division of Vanguard Dynamics, and right there on the official press release, printed in bold, undeniable ink, was my name, Madison Allen, Chief Architect and Managing Director of the division. I stood in my massive new corner office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the breathtaking expanse of the Chicago skyline. The city was glowing, alive with endless possibilities. Outside my heavy oak door, the bustling floor of the engineering department was in full swing. Young, brilliant engineers walked past the glass, nodding to me and calling me boss with genuine, unforced respect in their eyes. I turned away from the window and looked up at the wall behind my desk. There was no massive novelty check hanging there. There were no arrogant magazine covers. Framed in sleek, minimalist black glass was a single, yellowed sheet of notebook paper. It was the very first piece of scratch paper where I had hastily scribbled down the foundational algorithm code when I was just 19 years of age. I looked at that faded ink and smiled. I had taken back absolutely everything that rightfully belonged to me, and I did not do it with tears. I did it with source code. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city and country in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling and want to hear more, please remember that our channel has been forced to stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and is moving entirely to Patreon. We desperately need your support to keep going. Please help us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to the absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right now on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay strong.